Winter came hard to Black Hollow, Pennsylvania. Tucked deep within the folds of the Allegheny Mountains, the village was nearly erased each year by snow, buried under feet of silence and cold. Roads turned to ghost trails. Fires burned dim behind frostbitten windows. And even the birds, it seemed, dared not sing until spring returned. On the 3rd day of January in 1873, something unseasonal arrived in Black Hollow. She was just a girl. No more than 12. She emerged from the forest barefoot, pale feet unmarred by ice or briar, wearing nothing but a spotless blue nightgown that fluttered gently in the wind, despite no wind blowing. Her skin was porcelain white. Her hair, as black as raven feathers, was braided neatly down her back. But it was her eyes, cold, metallic gray, sharp and unblinking, that unsettled even the most stoic men. She said her name was Emma Richter. No family. No belongings. No memory of where she had come from. Or so she claimed. Elias Barlow, a trapper known for his solitude and hard drinking, was the first to see her. He had been checking his snares near the northern treeline when he spotted the girl standing in the snow, motionless, as if waiting for him. He brought her into town, bundled in his wool coat, muttering to himself the whole way. The villagers were baffled. No one had ever heard of an Emma Richter. But among the elderly, among those with one foot still lingering in the realm of superstition, a murmur began. Some said she looked like a child who had died decades ago. Others swore she resembled several long-lost children from different families, children who had disappeared into the woods, never to return. Her presence stirred old memories, older fears. She was placed in the care of Dr. Jonathan Merrow, the town's only physician and an aging man of science who had spent a lifetime chasing explanations for the unexplainable. He examined her and found contradictions he could not reconcile. Her pulse was slow but steady, her skin cold but pliant, her lungs clear and strong. No signs of frostbite. No signs of malnourishment. She was alive. But in a way that made no sense. And then there was her speech. She spoke with an antiquated German accent, not like an immigrant, but like a person from another time. She referred to places and people that no longer existed. She recalled events from early in the 19th century, describing them in vivid detail. She recited old prayers and nursery rhymes not spoken aloud since the Napoleonic Wars. She talked of a great fire in Mainz, of the Rhine freezing over, and of men in red uniforms marching through her village. Emma Richter, by all appearances, should not exist. Dr. Merrow, torn between awe and dread, sent a telegram to the Philadelphia Academy of Sciences. He wrote, in trembling script, that he had encountered a living child who may exhibit spontaneous memory preservation of historical events beyond her lifespan, or else something far more disturbing. But before an answer could arrive, before any scholar could come, Emma Richter began to change the village. Children began sleepwalking. Dreams turned to nightmares. Animals fled the woods and starved at the edge of town rather than enter the trees again. Bells rang in the dead of night. Graves appeared where none had been dug, and through it all, Emma remained serene, silent, and smiling. Watching. Listening. Waiting. The people of Black Hollow believed they had found a lost child. They were wrong. They had awakened something that had never been lost. And as the snow continued to fall, blanketing the village in white silence, a darkness long buried began to stir beneath the ice, waiting to be named again. Its name was Emma Richter. Snow fell endlessly upon the roofs of Black Hollow. Ice gathered on every eave like the village was being preserved, locked in place, frozen in time. But inside Dr. Jonathan Merrow's modest home, time had stopped altogether. What began as an act of kindness, sheltering a lost girl, had become something else. A clinical curiosity. A growing obsession. A descent into the unknown. The doctor, ever a man of logic, had turned his home into a laboratory. Every room was filled with ledgers, inkpots, and diagrams. Thermometers, candles, prisms, and crucifixes were arranged on every shelf. Watches were wound and ticking, or supposed to be. He observed the girl with the meticulous patience of a scientist, and the frantic energy of a man unraveling. And the girl, Emma Richter, simply Saturday she never cried. never laughed, never blinked. She required no food. She refused bread, soup, meat, anything. But she accepted water. Only once a day. Sipped from a silver cup. She didn't sleep. Her body never showed fatigue. At night, she would sit upright in the guest room, eyes wide open, hands folded neatly, for hours on end, watching shadows move across the walls. Waiting for nothing. She was unfailingly polite, calm, and gentle. But something about her made the air wrong. The villagers began to whisper. At first, it was small things. Clocks that stopped the moment she entered the room. Candles that flickered violently, then died. No breeze, no cause. Mirrors that shattered when she passed. No explanation. No force. Just spiderweb cracks blooming across the glass, as if they couldn't bear to reflect her face. Animals were the first to know. The town's strays refused to come near her. Dogs howled at the door of Dr. Merrow's house. Birds vanished from the trees surrounding it. Horses bucked and resisted if led too close to the road where she walked. On 3 occasions, Elias Barlow, the trapper who had found her, claimed to see her standing alone at the forest's edge, whispering. Her voice soft, melodic, ancient, speaking in a language he recognized but couldn't name. When he described the sounds to the Lutheran priest, Father Hallberg, the old man paled and said it resembled Old High German, a dialect not spoken in over 500 years, and even then, not by children. But it was her knowledge that disturbed the townsfolk most. She spoke of ancient texts, quoted Latin and Greek fluently, even correcting Father Hallberg on mistranslations of obscure scripture. She described details of battles, natural disasters, and epidemics not recorded in any book, events that were only confirmed when a local scholar cross-checked her descriptions with rare military reports and foreign archives. She predicted 2 deaths. A young farmhand named Reuben Marsh was thrown from his horse, just hours after Emma had calmly asked if he'd told his mother goodbye that morning. And then, an older woman, Mrs. Bramley, succumbed to an undiagnosed illness, her heart failing in the middle of the night. Emma had said, only a day prior, that Mrs. Bramley's house would be emptied before the firewood runs out. The villagers began to call her cursed. Or worse, a waldhex, a forest witch. They avoided the doctor's home. Children were forbidden from going near it. Candles were lit at night and hung in windows facing the hill. The old superstitions returned in full force. Dr. Merrow, meanwhile, chronicled it all. At first, his notes were precise, detailing body temperature, pulse, respiration. Her spoken phrases, the languages she used. The timing of phenomena. But soon, his writing began to change. The letters grew larger. Messier. Margins were filled with symbols. Spirals. Circles within circles. Most frequently, he drew an eye, but not a normal one. Always the same, lidless, and with 7 lashes above it, like a sun with trailing lines. He began referring to Emma only as the vessel. He no longer spoke to friends. He refused patience. He let his beard grow wild and wore the same wool coat daily. He lost weight. He paced the halls of his home at night, muttering in broken Latin. And worse, he began to hear things. He told Father Hallberg that he heard voices through the girl's silence. That when she stared at him, his ears would ring, then buzz, and then he would hear a name whispered in a tongue that didn't belong to earth. A name that vibrated in his spine. A name he couldn't repeat without shaking. By February, it was no longer a question of what Emma was. The question became, what had she brought with her? Something had come out of the woods with that barefoot girl. Something that now lived in Black Hollow, watching the villagers from behind her still, porcelain face. And in his journal, in red ink scrawled across the page like a scream, Dr. Merrow wrote, "The vessel is not alone. It never was, she is the door. And something is beginning to knock." By the time March cast its long shadows across Black Hollow, the snow had begun to melt, but the cold had not lifted. Instead, a deeper frost had taken root. Not in the ground, but in the hearts of the villagers, who now crossed the street rather than passed Dr. Merrow's home. The air around that house felt charged, like the calm before lightning, and then, word arrived, Help was coming. Or so it seemed. From across the ocean, summoned by Dr. Merrow's increasingly erratic letters and the whispering grapevine of European academia, a man of great and terrible knowledge boarded a ship in Hamburg and sailed for the New World. His name was Professor Alaric Brandt, a German scholar whose reputation was whispered about in dusty university basements and locked reading rooms. Once an anatomist, then an alchemist, and finally, an occultist, Brandt had spent his life chasing forbidden truths. He had been expelled from the University of Göttingen for conducting soul transference experiments. He was banned by the Church of Bavaria. Yet still he published. Still he knew. He arrived in Black Hollow on March 3 RD. Tall, stern, immaculately dressed in a black wool overcoat, gloves of cured stag hide, and a fedora that seemed older than the town itself. He carried with him a single trunk, iron-bound and sealed with a wax sigil, which thudded heavily upon the inn's floorboards. Inside were books bound in flayed skin, inked in languages no longer spoken, their pages swollen with moisture and time. Brandt examined Emma on the morning of March 4th. His interview lasted just 17 minutes. When he emerged from Dr. Merrow's parlor, his face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly. He ordered a jug of black tea and remained in silence for 3 days. Then he spoke a single phrase. Kinder der Schwarz, children of the blackness. Brandt claimed that Emma was not a girl, not in the human sense. She was a vessel for a being far older than Christianity, far older than language itself. A creature of memory. A witness of entropy. He cited ancient Silesian myths and references buried in the Codex Ludovicus, that once every century, one such child-shaped echo appeared among mankind. Never born. Never aged. Simply emerged. They bore no malice. They were not demons. Not angels. But something, adjacent to both. Sentient memories, wrapped in the flesh of a child. Brandt believed Emma Richter was one such entity. A child of the blackness. According to his research, these spirits came not to harm, but to observe. To listen. To record. But if they overstayed their time among humans, if they were not returned to the forest by the vernal equinox, then the balance they maintained would unravel, not just for themselves, but for everything around them. Time would twist. Days would loop. People would vanish from memory. Families would forget their own names. History itself might begin to fray at the edges. Black Hollow, Brandt warned, was in danger of being unwoven. Dr. Merrow, however, resisted the idea. He remained convinced that Emma was simply a child, rare, perhaps, even miraculous. The product of a lost bloodline or some dormant genetic memory. He believed that science, real science, could still explain her. But Brandt would not wait for belief. He began preparing a ritual. He said it would allow Emma to return to the place behind the veil. A process not of death, but of release. It required a circle of salt, drawn at dusk. Ash from pine trees struck by lightning. A fire kept burning without interruption for 7 full hours. And above all, Emma must step willingly into the circle. Merrow called it superstition. Folklore wrapped in fear. The two men argued violently. Voices raised. Glass shattered. Emma, sitting on the staircase, simply watched, her gray eyes unblinking, her head slightly tilted, as if listening to music no one else could hear. Then, on the night of March 15th, Brandt vanished. He was last seen entering his rented room at the inn, carrying one of his older tomes, a thick black book with no title and no author. By morning, he was gone. His door was locked from the inside. The window remained closed. The only signs of disturbance were a long trail of blood, stretched from the corner of the bed to the foot of the wardrobe, and dozens of torn pages, each covered in tight handwritten German and ritual symbols, strewn about the room like leaves. Strangest of all, no footprints. No signs of struggle. Just a steady, dragging trail of crimson and one handprint on the mirror. Upside down. A week later, the torn pages were found inside the village well, floating, dry, and warm to the touch, as if recently written. Emma never spoke of him again. When asked about the professor, she smiled softly and said, "He asked the wrong questions." And so, March came and went. The snow began to thaw, but beneath the melting frost, something deeper stirred, and the equinox crept closer. The village of Black Hollow had 5 days left, before the thread was pulled, and time began to bleed. Spring came late to Black Hollow in 1873. But when it came, it did not bring warmth. It brought rot. The last snows melted reluctantly, trickling down into black soil that refused to bloom. Trees remained bare. The wind whistled hollow and dry. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The river, once clear and fast, now ran sluggish, thick with silt and dead fish, their silver scales turned gray and brittle. The crops, planted with the last hope of winter's end, blackened from the inside, stalks hollowed, leaves curled like scorched paper. Livestock miscarried or refused to eat. Flies returned early, in unnatural numbers, and then the children. 2 babies were born that April. Both arrived with open eyes, glassy, lifeless, and utterly still. One did not cry. The other cried without end, its mouth stretching wide in a soundless scream. It died 3 days later, its skin turning waxy and pale. Midwives whispered that its heartbeat sounded backwards. The villagers prayed. But even the church had changed. Each night at exactly midnight the bell rang once, a deep, groaning toll that echoed across the valley, chilling bones and silencing even the insects. No one pulled the rope. No one dared go near the tower anymore. Father Hallberg, the priest, was seen kneeling in the graveyard, weeping into his hands. He no longer entered the chapel. Inside Dr. Merrow's house, the air had grown unbearable. The walls sweated in the cold. Books bled ink. Pages turned on their own. Inkwells dried instantly when used, yet spilled across the desk on their own, forming curling, looping symbols in an unknown script. Emma had changed. She was no longer the quiet, pale girl who'd emerged from the woods in January. She had grown taller. Not aged, just elongated. Her limbs were too smooth. Her eyes too wide. And they had turned a shade of deep silver, almost mercurial. When she spoke now, it was often in multiple voices, some layered beneath others like echoes through time. The villagers had stopped saying her name, and even Dr. Merrow, once a man of rational science, no longer denied the truth. His journals had become erratic, filled with glyphs, diagrams, and untranslated symbols written in what appeared to be his own blood. When asked what language it was, he stared blankly and replied, "It's not a language, it's a door." His handwriting had changed. His eyes were sunken, his nails blackened, and he muttered often of things behind the veil, and the song beneath silence. Something had begun to tear, and the equinox had passed. The time to return Emma to the forest had come and gone. The village felt it. Reality trembled at the edges. Time slipped. Villagers began to experience lost hours. People would blink and find the sun lower. Entire conversations vanished from memory. One boy was seen on the same road 3 times in a day, wearing the same clothes, carrying the same bucket of milk, but had no memory of ever walking it. The past was bleeding into the present, and the present was folding in on itself. On the night of April 17th, the people of Black Hollow decided they had suffered enough. A group of 7 men, led by Elias Barlow, the very man who had first found Emma in the snow, stormed Dr. Merrow's home. Torches in hand, guns loaded. They believed they could end it, that by removing the girl, they could put a stop to the rot, the death, the madness. But when they broke down the door, the house was empty, cold, silent. Not abandoned, just gone. And no signs of struggle. No blood. No signs of escape. Just absence. Emma. Dr. Merrow. All of his journals. His relics. His notes. Vanished. Every drawer empty. Every cabinet bare. No footprints. No warmth in the ashes. Only one thing remained, carved, deep and jagged, into the wood above the hearth. Do not search. She is everywhere now. The villagers stared at the message for a long time, no one daring to speak. Then Elias Barlow dropped his torch. The flames took quickly to the dry wood. The house burned silently, like it was glad to go. And none of the men tried to stop it. They just watched. Watched as the fire consumed what little remained of reason in Black Hollow. And when the final beam collapsed, the church bell rang once more, though the rope had long since rotted away. Emma Richter was no longer in the village, because the village was no longer itself, and the child of the blackness had been set free. Time returned to Black Hollow in 1874. Not all at once. Not with fanfare or clarity. But like fog lifting from a drowning man, uncertain, slow, painful, the trees began to bloom again. Birds returned to the skies. The river ran clear, as if the poison had never touched it. Children were born healthy. Names were remembered. And the sun, for the first time in months, rose without hesitation or dread. The church bell ceased its midnight tolling, and for a moment, a year, maybe two, the people dared to believe they had survived something ancient. Something evil. Something over. But the scars remained. Dr. Merrow's house was never rebuilt. Its charred foundation stood like a wound on the hill, overgrown with thorns and moss, avoided even by animals. Children were told to keep away. None ever disobeyed. The land around the house remained unnaturally silent, no birdsong, no wind, no insects. Just stillness, as if the world itself held its breath in that place. 10 years passed. Black Hollow endured. Some left, unable to forget. Some stayed, determined not to speak of what had happened. And some, like Elias Barlow, grew old with the knowledge buried deep, behind the eyes, in the marrow, where it couldn't be named but could never be ignored. Then, in the summer of 1883, a box was found in Philadelphia, over 100 miles east. A young archivist named Clara Winslow was sorting through unclaimed belongings from the Northern Asylum, long since closed and moldering in bureaucracy. Most were mundane, cracked glasses, faded letters, nameless sketches. But one box was different. It was sealed with wax and cord, the tag on it yellowed with age. Written in deep, precise script were the words, Richter E. Inside were 4 items: a small black leather journal, brittle at the spine. A folded sepia photograph of a girl in a pale gown, standing beside a man presumed to be Dr. Merrow, though his eyes had been scratched out. A length of black hair, braided tightly, preserved in glass, and a second, thicker journal, bound in stitched deer hide, filled with drawings, runes, and a final confession. In it, Dr. Merrow explained what had truly happened. He had not destroyed Emma. He had tried to bind her. Not her body, for that had long ceased to matter, but her presence, her echo, her reach. Through ritual and invocation, through sacrifice and fire, he had tethered her to the land of Black Hollow. Rooted her in place. Prevented her from spreading beyond the village's edge. But he had failed. Or rather, he had only partially succeeded. She cannot walk, he wrote, but she can reach. She cannot cross the rivers, but she can whisper through mirrors, through ink, through dream. And then, in his final pages, drawn in shaky, uneven hand, he warned, the vessel is not gone. She waits for open minds, for broken souls, for those who ask questions they should not. She is snow. She is silence. She is memory unbound. Clara Winslow was never seen again after that summer. Her colleagues at the Historical Registry said she began speaking German in her sleep, though she had never studied it. She filled her notebooks with the same looping symbols found in Merrow's journal. She stopped answering letters. Her final known entry in the official archive read, I saw her. In the forest. She said my name. And then silence. But Clara wasn't the last. Over the decades, those who studied the Richter box, folklorists, psychologists, occult historians, began to report similar experiences. They dreamed of a girl in a pale blue gown, standing at the edge of a snow-covered forest, barefoot, smiling, whispering words in a voice that made the stars pulse behind their eyes. Some said they awoke with frost on their windows, in midsummer. Others found their journals had been written in while they slept, in languages they did not know. The braid of black hair was eventually stolen. The box changed hands dozens of times. But the message remained. Emma Richter was never just a girl. She was, and still is, the echo of forgotten time. And even now, in the still places, the quiet places, where memory grows thick and names are lost like dust, she waits, listening, watching. And if you dream tonight of snow and silence, you may already have heard her. Time moves forward, but not for everyone. In 2023, nearly 150 years after the girl first stepped from the woods barefoot, her name, Emma Richter, surfaced again, not in whispers, not in dreams, but in the course catalog of Miskatonic University, under a graduate thesis titled Vanished, Unexplained Child Disappearances in 19th Century Pennsylvania, by a student named Claire Myers. Claire was a researcher, brilliant, skeptical, meticulous. She didn't believe in folklore. She believed in patterns, data, historical truth. And so, when she stumbled upon the forgotten records from the Philadelphia archives, the sealed box labeled Richter E., she saw not a legend, but a mystery waiting to be solved. The photographs disturbed her first. They were old, yes, faded and worn, but they had detail no 19th century camera should have captured. The girl's face was crystal clear. Her eyes, impossibly sharp, seemed to follow Claire around the room. The longer she stared, the more she felt like the expression changed, grew sharper, hungrier, and one photo, in particular, did something stranger. Depending on the angle of light, Emma appeared alone, standing in the snow in her pale blue gown. But when the photo was tilted slightly, a second figure appeared. A shadowed silhouette standing directly behind Emma. It had outstretched arms, long and thin, reaching toward her. It wore no face. Claire dismissed it as a trick of exposure, a damaged plate, a smudge on old film. But she kept looking. She read every journal in the box, cross-referenced names, mapped Black Hollow's location using old surveyor maps and USGS overlays. It had become a ghost town, abandoned in the 1920s after a series of strange fires, a suspected mass hallucination event, and the complete erasure of half the town's birth records. The land was still listed as federal wilderness. No trespassing. That didn't stop Claire. She packed her gear, a tent, food, camera equipment, and the journal of Dr. Jonathan Merrow, and hiked into the forest. The trip was not documented in her thesis. It wasn't part of the university's record. It was something she didn't tell anyone about. She reached Black Hollow on the night of October 17, 2023. What remained of the village was skeletal, moss-covered beams, rusted weather vanes, and empty wells. But the doctor's house still stood, or rather, what was left of it. The foundation, blackened and broken, was visible beneath the overgrowth. She camped there, right at the center. That night, Claire set her camera to record. The footage lasted 8 hours, and for most of that time, it captured only static. White noise, flickering blackness. Occasionally, the sound of wind. A fox scream. Crickets. Until the final 30 seconds. That portion was clear. Too clear. The footage shows Claire's tent from a distance, bathed in moonlight. All is still. No movement. No sound. Then, in the background, just beyond the tree line, a figure emerges. A girl, wearing a pale blue gown. She doesn't move. Doesn't blink. Her head is tilted, ever so slightly, just as Elias Barlow once described. Her eyes glow faintly, like twin coals under glass. And slowly, silently, she raises one hand and points at the camera. The screen cuts to black. Claire Myers was never seen again. Her tent was found weeks later by hikers, untouched, her gear still inside. No signs of struggle. No blood. Only her camera. Batteries drained, lens shattered, and yet, one item did make it back. The final page of her personal notebook arrived by mail, postmarked from a dead zip code in rural Pennsylvania. It was addressed to her thesis advisor. No return address. No handwriting on the envelope. Only a single sheet of paper, written in red ink. She walks again. Science cannot hold her. Time cannot trap her. She is the question no answer can silence. Today, the name Emma Richter appears in no official census. The coordinates of Black Hollow are missing from modern maps. But some say, if you go deep enough into the old woods of Pennsylvania, past where the frost never melts and the trees grow too close together, you might still find her, standing in the snow, waiting.